Rise of the Eco Guards. Stand on guard with me. The Call to Serve Canada. Part 2, Section H. Finding the energy to regeneratively move forward. Hello, and welcome back to the Rise of the Eco Guards Stand on Guard with Me series of works entitled The Call to Serve Canada. This video series is brought to you by Gemco, Incorporated, 1990, the parent entity responsible for its other not-for-profit divisions, encompassing those known as the Eco Guards organizations, which all include Eco Guards, IES, an acronym which stands for Innovative Eco Solutions, Gemco Deep, with its other acronym known as Digital Eco Educational Productions, and Eco Tech Arts, as well as the Young Eco Rangers, as we proceed with the blessing of Asgardian Ministries. With our educational, informative, investigative, conceptual, artistic, well-thought-out designs and deterministic videos in this 10-part series. In the past video sequences of the Call to Serve Canada, I expressed many of the things that I had studied and helped out with in my youth during the early 1970s as it related towards our local, provincial, and federal political arenas, as well as learning a great deal about our ecology, our economy, and the proper educational principles that had transpired from my initial involvement within many other types of groups. Before, but also later within several Christian-based groups, dating back to before 1978, where we set out to help with our city's homeless and transient people's plights. For no one else was doing it in our community at that time, and the need was increasing, as well as what had truly taken place in many surrounding areas, also within the city of Moncton, in the county of Westmoreland, in the province of New Brunswick, Canada. But now, I'll delve further into portions of what transpired after I left those very important volunteerism activities, our previous goals, and our wondrous achievements that I left behind at Christian home centers in late 1984 that I truly believed were worthwhile, but had also taken its toll on the many people working to help alleviate those many conditions. For those activities had drained many of us of the inspirational, our physical and spiritual energies that all volunteers need when conducting such affairs and helping those less fortunate that are in need, that we had accomplished during those many years for our community and our peoples, at least to the best of our abilities, without direct purposeful government funding, but with very limited local businesses helping us in attaining the goods or products needed for our everyday operations. As we also then assisted several other organizations who were then just beginning their operations or endeavors, as well as their abilities in later gaining better supports from governments, which I believe was partly due to my conversations and limited persuasions within my past efforts while I was helping out during the many political campaigns of the many other politicians that I worked with. And I believe those past conversations and efforts later yielded fruit and helped those newer groups as they also pursued these types of actions without our further help, regardless of their heavily controlled manners of attempting at completing their own goals. That said, although I had moved out of the CHC with my wife in mid-1984, and we began a different part or phase of our lives, I would still somewhat be involved with the CHC and the Little Lighthouse Street Ministries from time to time for at least a little over another year. Anyhow, upon leaving those past efforts and working towards raising a young family of my own and placing myself back in our societal workforce, and after attaining what I thought was a great job with the assistance of a dear friend, as an employee at one of the best remaining Canadian Chinese food restaurants in our city. For after witnessing my mother, whom worked as a hostess for over 20 years by that time, at what many believe was the best Chinese food restaurant in Moncton, actually quite the hotspot for anyone of importance coming to our city, known as the Palace Grill, Imperial Room, had closed their doors and was really difficult to find great Chinese food in town after that. But really, the place that I was now working, known as the Ming Garden Restaurant, was also known for their great food, just more expensive, at least according to many other people. But I thought it was not expensive, but I will admit it was great food. And working my way up within several positions was fine by me, as long as I could take care of my family. And back then, it was not as difficult to take care of a young family on my wages, not like it is now. Anyways, the positions that I had attained, which were as an assistant cook, the other as a dishwasher and cleanliness specialist, which are all important positions within any restaurant, for the provincial health department checks on a regular basis for great cleanliness of not only the dishes, but the main cooking areas and ventilation systems, which I was also responsible for within that time and place. For I also had some prior experiences working with a friend of mine, whom was the lead cook at a local tavern many years earlier when I was 12 years of age, just before leaving grade school and moving out of my mother's house. I experienced something that many young people do when they get married at a very young age for the wrong reasons. Suffice to say, the young woman I had married seemed to be more interested in running the roads with her infant son while I was at work. But I also found out very much later, after she was back home in Ontario, that she also conducted herself disrespectfully when I was not present and without my knowledge. And to make a long story much shorter, I helped her and her son safely get back to her family and home in one of Ontario's largest cities, when she also indicated that she wanted to just visit her parents with the babe. But it turned out to be a trick just to get themselves to her parents' home without me going along or present, regardless of the fact that I treated her and her babe with nothing but great kindness and exceptional love. And years later, we were eventually divorced. But like I said, there was a lot more to it than just that. For besides being heartbroken as it relates to both physical bonds with her and the child being ripped apart, those instances caused me to internally reflect upon my life back then, and that caused so many other issues to arise. Nevertheless, I never wanted anything but good things for her and her infant son, as I still hope for both of them. But I will let you know this fact. When other people claim that a self-reflection of one's own abilities or the things that make up a person's life, soul, and mannerisms, let alone the person's failures, are very difficult to properly achieve, they're not wrong, for a true, deeply internal reflection of one's true self is sometimes one of the hardest personal experiences you'll truly ever go through. But when you come out on the other side and find your ways through it, that can completely change who you are and really want to be, or the ways and manners you conduct yourself. That said, there are other things in life that no one should ever have to go through, that are definitely even more difficult, like losing a loved one to suicide or worse. But personally speaking, a self-induced internal reflection is extremely difficult to pull off, mostly because you have to be completely open and honest with yourself, for you can't hide anything from yourself or God. And that's a great thing, because then you can keep the things that you know to be true and honest and get rid of or change the rest. Truly worthwhile goals. After about a year of feeling down and out and no longer employed with the Mingarda restaurant, and also comprehending that nothing would change in my life unless I got up to make those things happen, I decided to go back to school and attain my General Educational Development Certificate/diploma. At that time, I was not working again, and for some reason the unemployment insurance refused to accept my claim. So I approached my welfare worker requesting her help in getting back to school. After several weeks of back and forth, she told me there was nothing they could do to help me get back to attain my education. The only physical saving grace, well, beside God's saving grace, was the fact that my apartment, which my mother had helped me and my now estranged wife attain through a trust company, a smallish type 2-bedroom apartment on the top level of a retrofitted very large older home that had been changed into a 7-apartment complex, was very inexpensive, coming in at $230 a month including electricity, and that included the electric heat during winter as well. It was actually a very, very nice place to live if you could get past the somewhat warm days during the summer. Nevertheless, we acclimated to our living conditions. So I struggled each month to maintain my limited living conditions by doing odd jobs and small projects for people that would pay me very small amounts of money. Anyhow, one morning I decided to start my day off by going for breakfast at a local deluxe fish and chips restaurant, like I had done several times before, for this place was serving a simple menu of 2 eggs, bacon and toast, with all-you-could-drink coffee for $1.99. During that breakfast, I got into a conversation with a person that would eventually later in time become just like a brother to me. And as the weeks went by, and during one of our conversations, Morgan asked me what I wanted to do with my life. So I explained my desire to go back to school and the difficulties that I was having in getting back into any place that could help me. It just so happened that Morgan was doing that exact same thing through the John Howard Society. So he asked me a simple but interesting question. He wanted to know if I had ever spent time in jail. Really reluctant to answer, for I had been through something when I was 15 years of age that I really did not want to talk about, but that the judge had indicated would be sealed and stricken or kept for my adult record if I kept my nose clean. Suffice to say, Morgan told me to go to the John Howard Society and to speak with the coordinator of that program to see if I could get into their GED program. To make a long story short, surprisingly they accepted me into that program, where over about a year, I would learn a great many things until the day that I would need to go to our local New Brunswick Community College to complete those exams. Surprisingly, about 2 weeks later I received that certificate/diploma and then moved up into the John Howard Society academic upgrading and life skills programs. By this time, I had moved back into my mother's house, for she had approached me during the time that I was attaining my better schooling and indicated that as long as I was in school and working toward bettering myself and my future prospects, that she was more than happy to have me back home. Not that she wanted me to leave when I did years earlier, for I truly believe she did not want me to go out on my own at 13. But I was stubborn and would not go to school to continue being bullied beyond belief. And truthfully, I'm sure it hurt her when I did leave, even though I would check in with her every week or so. And I was still in the same city, well, at least for a while, for I did travel to Toronto, but only stayed there for 2 weeks and began to make my way back to NB. Well, until I stopped in Oshawa, Ontario, where I remained for quite some time. Anyhow, I'm getting off track here, but I will say, I loved Oshawa, a mid-sized city very similar to the size of Moncton NB, and filled with hard-working, kind people that I came to respect. Although I would not be successful at attaining a job in the automotive manufacturing or assembly facilities found in that place, all because of my lack of education at that time. So after some time, I made my way back home to Moncton. Anyways, let's get back to when I moved into my mother's house in very early 1986. But also understand that by this time, I had just turned 21 years of age, and I had learned a great deal about life while out on the street at first, and then helping to manage the Christian home centers. And my respect for my mother and everything that she had and continued to do for me and my other siblings was very much different than that of what it was years before, when I moved out at the age of 13. I do recall clearly during those 2 years before moving back into Mum's house, the previous written works that I had worked on, namely the Eco Guards 3Es, novellas that I had begun and created in 1983, and in 1986 I completed the last story of the 3-part series that I kept trying to get published. With that said, 4 years I would continue to hone my skills as a limited writer and illustrator. For even though I had attained my English educations by that time, the ways that my brain works, mostly because of my French education and upbringing, still interfered with those true writing skills, and to be forward about it, it's most likely quite obvious in these writings as well. Nevertheless, I would not give up, and kept pushing myself to do better and better. Within that time frame, I also kept sending these 3 Eco Guards 3Es novella manuscripts out to many publishers throughout the world, and even sent it to many governments in Canada, asking if these speculative fiction stories were good enough for possible school library publications. After all, they were all achieved to help open the eyes of young peoples about what humanity was truly doing to our one and only planet's ecosystems, its waters, lands, and skies, but also to show a possible series of future events if humanity did not change from its destructive ways and manners of conducting all our affairs. But all of that was also to help show that humanity should gain and eventually teach the balanced eco approach to our everyday lives. And all these types of things could be achieved with our different comprehensions and newer technologies set to now take the world stage. I believe that I also sent these past unpublished literary and illustrated works multiple times to Scholastic Canada, a company known for creative educational products. I also sent them the other eco-based illustrated children's books that I had created, like The Adventures of Peter the Pleasant Platypus and Friends, as well as Platypus Tales, and another series of illustrated works concerning bullying known as Bob the Big Bad Beaver. And that was done long before books of this nature were even out in the mainstream, and even several other unique productions of mine that I would eventually attain the certificates of copyright for. But again and again, only rejection letters followed. Anyhow, I would not give up and continued to write and illustrate these types of eco-based artistic literary works in my spare time, which also included my revisions of the past written movie scripts of the Water Wars for what my friends and I had attempted to achieve after witnessing the first Star Wars movie in 1977, during which a different type of script that eventually became an eco-based comic book science fiction series would first be created in late 1977 and in early 1978 that I had left behind at my mom's house before I moved out on my life's journey. Eventually, those were somewhat revised into several attempted story names, like Gravitron, and then finally the Robo-Trek series. That said, over some time, the Robo-Trek illustrated series caught the attention of a publisher in the United States. However, they only wanted the text version, so I revised the script into a strictly text version with some limited illustrations, and they published it under the title of Robo-Trek: The Unknown Chronicles. Moreover, there was a lot more to that sequence of events that I'll not get into right now, but at least I could now say that I'm a published author and illustrator, while also continuing with my other projects upon moving back home, like my repulsed electromagnetic generator, that everyone that's seen it warned me about, for they kept indicating it was impossible to achieve because they thought it violated the laws of physics, which it does not. But I thought, if I did completely achieve the factual prototype, that many elitists or even certain industries would not attempt to kill me over its creation. And the reason I say that is because there were stories in many magazines of such types of things being attempted, like the stories of Stanley Meyer, whom eventually died under somewhat suspicious circumstances, because he had claimed to have created a car that ran on water. And you know what? I believe him, for it's not as difficult to do as one might think. Anyways, I tried not to let it bother me, for those happenstance were never really proven. For I even wrote about water and magnetics as being part of the fuel of the future in my Water Wars, Gravitron, and Robo-Trek series when I was 17 years of age, and even in the BIOS Wars Chronicles series of literary and video works, now being further created and released. For water, electrons, and magnetics are found everywhere, throughout the universe, in one form or another. And truly, that's what my comprehensions about the ways God also set up the universe and a great many things to function like. For those understandings can also be found in the Holy Scriptures and so much more. And truthfully, the power of water and magnetics compels everyone at some point or another during their lives. And whether you drink it, bathe with it, or use it to stay cool, the fuel of the future is not meant for fools whom think they can control all of it. It's only meant for those that are cool and respect God's rule. And the sooner we begin to truly respect our freely flowing living waters, the sooner we can all get on with better lives. Anyways, all these types of apparatuses I did explore and came to many true determinations concerning a great many. But even those I found to be possible great sources of future innovative energy solutions would require many decades to properly develop and scale up to any real form of industrial standards. But it's still possible, regardless of what some believe. For it would still take a great many years, if not decades, to properly scale up to its intended industrial purpose. But those explorations of those types of power generation systems were not just limited to that one. For I began to explore a great many more right around that same time. And that was regardless of the fact that I was very adamant about properly creating it, even though I really did not have the skill sets yet or the right machining equipments to properly achieve that goal let alone the vast amounts of funds to support such an effort. But that's where my further chosen educations would come into the equations after attaining my General Equivalency Diploma, or General Educational Development as it's now known, and also attaining my Academic Upgraded Credits and Diploma. I'll get into those facts soon. For I thought it could solve an important energy problem facing humanity and the world. And that was because at that time, I believed that the petroleum industry, as well as the nuclear industry, were some of the greatest polluters upon the earth, which at least one of them still is. But that was also because many people and environmental groups in our world were pushing those fallacies, as well as freaking out the populations during the 1970s energy crisis. With that said, over some time, I would immerse myself in learning the absolute truth about both the petrol industry and the nuclear industry. And when you realize such, it's a great wake-up call. But it also really opens your eyes to a great many facts about our science's any future possibilities, and even areas that would astonish those that want to know those truths. But I'll tell you right now, some people that knew me back then would have assumed or believed that the industry that I consider to be the most toxic to everything upon Earth is the petroleum industry. But that's not the case. For the nuclear industry is far worse than anything else. And the latest rendition of what they want to create, such as the small modular reactors, are far worse, and those are a really bad idea. But yet many governments believe these stupid people, whom are all out just to make a quick buck. At least with the petroleum industry, the CO2 generated and expelled into the environment is far easier for the earth and living plants to deal with. In the event of an oil spill on land, it's also far easier to clean up, which would be far more difficult to achieve for toxic nuclear waste. But oil spills on, or in water, are another matter, for they are very disastrous and difficult to clean up. Nevertheless, it's still doable, unlike radioactive materials like those being pushed out into the Pacific from the Fukushima Daiichi disaster. While on the other hand, nothing can deal with the toxic radioactive elemental waste created by nuclear reactors. Moreover, the constant amount of energy and money needed to deal with that toxic radioactive waste continues to grow and will be of greater and greater concern to humanity, even going further into the future. And God forbid that our societies ever break down, and there's no one to maintain those underground containment and storage facilities. That said, I did explore finding a proper, more effective manner of dealing with those spent rods and the toxic pellets found therein. And really, I do believe I pulled it off. But again, no one acknowledges those works. Just like when the Deepwater Horizon accident happened in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010, when I sent a great solution to President Barack Obama and the main company, British Petroleum, after he made the public call or appeal for any solutions to sealing that leaking system, where we would design and submit a great solution in order to show his team of engineers how to think outside the box. Anyhow, later a plumber by the title of Joe the Plumber would claim to have been the one to give that solution, when I believe it came from many places and individuals. And we all showed how that oil well could be properly sealed and capped. And lo and behold, the solution that they used very much resembles the one that the Eco-Guard think tank sent to them. Again, no credit given where credit is possibly due. And regardless of any credit being given, at least the Eco-Guard's organizations did what was right and may have contributed to that real innovative eco-based solution. And rightfully so, for when instances of this nature occur, it's all hands on deck. Anyways, back onto where I was at, as it relates to nuclear energy. I'm truly uncertain why many people in this world don't truly comprehend those truths about nuclear energy, or why they allow themselves to be fooled or deceived by peoples that keep pushing this type of manner of boiling water to run a high-velocity steam turbine that harnesses or generates electricity, when there are safer, cleaner, and more efficient manners of doing that. I believe I've expressed many of those as well within several of my past works of this series. But I've also expressed a great many other eco-based initiatives that I had been involved with just prior to my other siblings and I in our developments of the real Eco-Guards organizations that were created in 1987. Anyhow, after gaining a better education and also completing my general educational development training and gaining my certificate/diploma and also attaining my academic upgrading credits and diploma in 1984 through to 1986. I sought to study and attain a degree in computer electronics engineering, during which time I also continued to explore further manners of creating several other types of apparatuses that could possibly generate more power than that of what was being input, and again kept getting the runaround when attempting to discuss the possibility of such a device with anyone of so-called higher educations. And that was possibly because those people thought I was trying to create a free energy device, which can never be achieved, for any manner of creating or harnessing energy will require an apparatus, and you can't make those for free. So that, in and of itself, proves that free energy can never happen. But inexpensive energy is real. Moreover, after discussing my goals with my mother and two brothers, who were all living at home, as well as bringing those to the attentions of several close friends, like Mr. Ronald Joseph Mills, my personal spiritual and eco-based solutions creator and advisor, and dear friend, and my real mentor of a man, Reverend Ralph Caldwell, the founder of the CHC, whom also helped me achieve many things. My mom told me that I could use that old garage that needed to be fixed first, but also the back area of the house, in order to conduct my further educations and eco-based explorations and studies. Thankfully, I had learned a great deal about building and remodeling homes when I was living at, but also helping to manage the CHC for all those years. And the repair of those buildings did not take very long, and it was all achieved with the use or reuse of used lumber and any other building supplies I would attain from many great sources, including the old Riverside city dumps that were not that far away from home. In fact, those buildings are still standing strong to this day, almost 40 years later. Not bad, 4 wooden buildings that were already quite old when I repaired those. But we would also use that technique over a great many more years later when building the outbuildings, otherwise known as the storage buildings for our electronic reclamations in 2011, as well as some of our other projects later in 2017 to 2024. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself again. Look for more on those projects in the last video of this series, entitled Part 2, Section J, Computational Determinations. Anyhow, back to where I left off. Over the course of the next 4 years, I would continue with my studies in computer electronics engineering, while also taking on so many more projects that I believe were so very important, like pushing to have that toxic Riverside city dump closed, as was previously mentioned in some of the past works found herein, like Chapter 2, Altered Attributes, that said, you should really go back to that and ponder upon what was stated therein, and would eventually culminate into my creation of the first Eco Guards battle armor in late 1987 to mid-1988. That year, I continued to wear this suit during my eco-based activisms, where I also won first place in the Moncton Downtown Halloween Party costume contest. Although I was not there for that, it did not hurt to gain that attention. And eventually, I created the next rendition of that type of battle armor, completely made with repurposed very thick plastics and Kevlars, as I have continued to create better renditions for many years afterwards. I did find it interesting, though, that whenever I would appear at public events to promote the closure of those Riverside dumps and the other eco-based initiatives of the Eco Guards organizations, including the many Canada Day celebrations over the years, that our local police officers were not only impressed, but also indicated that those were types of armored suits that they should also have. Sadly, I did not capitalize on that fact, but many years later noticed that a great many SWAT teams and even militaries were now starting to delve into creating their own versions. And even paintball equipment manufacturers and suppliers started using my initial designs. Anyways, moving back in time, in 1989, I would finally meet the woman and life partner that I would eventually marry years later in 1995, but also a young woman whom had also been through her own negative life experiences, actually quite similar to some of mine. And it just so happened that we had both been in the same class at Edith Cavell School the same year that I left, that had shaped a unique individual that only wanted to be truly loved, respected, and listened to. but also a person who wanted to have a family and a loving husband. Moreover, I still continued for years to also work on finding a real solution to all our energy concerns. And in 2008, after being injured on the job and attempting several rehabilitations and back-to-work attempts, that all failed. Due to the extent of spinal damages from the first workplace injury, as well as the further rehab injury sustained in 2010, that the workers' compensation system and those people continue to not cover my salary losses, or even the fact that they used a privately paid doctor to lie in his functional physical assessments, as well as plagiarize that very EcoGuard's 3 E's now combined in published novel series, and placing many of those fictions into my medical files, just helps to create further issues that help to prevent me from continuing my important works in those energy fields. For I used to use some of my salary to conduct those efforts. But I can say that I believe that I've nailed that solution right on the head. But it's still going to take me some more time to have the full-scale prototype built in order to prove everything that needs to be shown to all the scientists that will want to see it truly functioning over and over again. For that's part of real science and what they require. Prove that it properly works and that it can be easily replicated, and so much more. That now said, I'll leave off at this point for now. Please join me for the next video of this series of the rise of the EcoGuards. Stand on guard with me, the call to serve Canada. Entitled Part 2, Section I. Playing around with plastics reclamations.